Hey everybody, some Gadget Guy here with a camera test on the Samsung Galaxy Alpha, and many have been bemoaning the reduction in megapixels from 16 megapixels on the Galaxy S5 to 12 here on the Alpha. Samsung is staying quiet on the sensor size though, and if you've seen any of my other camera reviews, sensor size plays a more significant role in landing photographic stills and cinematic video than the number of pixels on the sensor. Looking at the Alpha's camera housing, I'd be very surprised if the sensor was a 1/3 inch, as the housing is very similar to what we see on the Galaxy S5, and the lens is physically bigger than the shooter on the LG G3. Not conclusive evidence, of course, that the Alpha has a 1/2 inch sensor, but if my hypothesis holds true, we should see subtly softer depth of field than the iPhone or G3 in our tests, and performance should close in on the Nokia Lumia 1520 and 930. Starting with some outdoor brightly lit flowers, incredible detail thanks to the UHD resolution. Saturation is nice and punchy and most scenes are nicely exposed. The auto contrast settings also help produce vivid looking video, which helps draw the eye to your subject. It's a colorful, aggressive, and bright exposure style. Now I selected spot exposure to try and rein in some of the overexposing like on this white flower, but the camera doesn't appear to use spot exposure when shooting UHD. It really didn't matter where I focused the camera, the software was largely making exposure decisions based on the center of the frame. While yellows look better than I thought they would in direct sunlight, reds are still getting oversaturated and blown out. We're losing a lot of detail on these bougainvillea blossoms. Most digital sensors have issues with reds, and the Alpha is no exception, especially in bright Los Angeles midday sun. Macro distances seem to have improved on the Alpha, and I can focus almost 2 inches closer to my subject than I can with the Galaxy S5. That might not seem like a lot, but it makes a world of difference in shooting tiny objects up close. Another bougainvillea shot, and the Alpha is doing a solid job of getting up close and personal without needing to use the zoom. These little flowers are just a little bigger than half my pinky nail. Not bad performance at all. Speaking of zoom, even with the lower resolution sensor, Samsung is still able to crank out a fairly decent 4x digital zoom while shooting UHD. It doesn't look as good as the HD zoom on a Lumia, but it's pleasantly surprising to see a phone with these specs shoot 4 times the resolution of the iPhone 6 and still land a nice looking zoom. Into our walking test, as the Alpha does not have hardware stabilization and extra horsepower is needed to produce smooth UHD video, there is also no electronic or software stabilization in play, and it really shows. Trying to glide or walk as smoothly as possible, you can still see a lot of shaking with each footfall. It seems to be even more apparent when your camera is producing 30 8.3 megapixel images a second. The sensor is natively a 16:9 aspect ratio, so there is no crop or punch in when you move from photos to videos. It's nice being able to compose, then decide in that moment to shoot stills or video and not worry about recomposing. Though I do find it frustrating that Samsung now also resets focus at the beginning of shooting video. You irritatingly have to get in the habit of refocusing as soon as you start rolling. In our street scene, the Alpha does a really good job of tracking movement, and the focusing system isn't getting overly confused by objects entering and exiting the frame. You'll see a little focus hunting, especially when white or black cars occupy the frame, but it's not overly distracting. We're also seeing great dynamic range as white cars are right on the edges of clipping, but we see a gorgeous blue gradient in the sky. On our Freeway Overpass test, we continue to see very solid performance with fast objects and great color saturation. The audio noise reduction is blurring some of the detail we might hear from individual cars, but thankfully it's not so destructive that it's creating that underwater warbling sound effect we might hear from an LG. Onto our transition test, the phone is working much harder producing UHD video, and while lateral panning isn't as smooth as we've seen on previous Samsungs, the Alpha is still managing to make exposure changes with a smooth and pleasant bloom, and happily the frame rate never drops below 30 frames per second. but it's not as pleasant a transition moving from dark to bright as we might see on the iPhone 6. Of course, the Alpha is also producing 4 times the video resolution of what the iPhone is capable of producing. So we should talk a little about depth of field and background blur. To my eye, the performance of this 12 megapixel sensor on the Alpha looks more like the half-inch sensors found on the Galaxy S5, newer Sony Xperias, and the high-end Lumias. Starting at macro distances, backgrounds begin blurring very quickly, even inches away from your subject, and the overall blur is far more pleasant than what I see from LG and Apple. Bokeh balls, for instance, are very softly defined, and even busy backgrounds don't seem to distract the eye away from your subject. It's a very pleasant effect, and I'd be shocked if this were a significantly smaller sensor than the one on the Galaxy S5. Now, for as solid as this camera is during the day, nighttime shots show a few weaknesses. In our nighttime intersection test, we can see a lot of lens flaring, ugly blooming effects from headlights and streetlights, and what appears to be ghosting reflections in the lens. I don't know yet if this is unique to my review unit, or if it will be a common problem with other Alphas too. Funnily enough, the situation improves with less light, and our creepy tunnel shot has far less reflecting and lens flaring. The Alpha is doing a great job with the white balance here, keeping the yellow wash on the front face without losing the blue lights down the tunnel. The creepy gate test shows a push towards more scientific white, however, while I think the gate should be a warmer yellow. But it's very nicely exposed considering how dim the area is. Our walkway test shows again the accuracy and subtle color differences between a white which is more white and one that is more yellow. Here we can also see that the noise reduction is actually kind of making the noise worse. Instead of the finer grain we might see from a Lumia in trying to blur the noise, Samsung is actually creating a larger, blockier noise. It's not overly destructive, I just think it's a funny consequence. And now a flower lit by a porch light yards away shows just how well the Alpha can resolve an image even when it's being pushed to its low light limits. So where does that leave us with the Alpha? Even though we can see a reduction in resolution from the sensor, performance follows on the heels of the Galaxy S5 very closely throughout all of our tests. In fact, the Alpha manages to score a point over the GS5 with macro enthusiasts. After spending years in development, Samsung now makes their own camera sensors. And the Alpha is only the second phone of theirs to rock an ISOCELL sensor, but they're already starting to give Sony and Nokia a run for their money. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching my videos, subscribing to my channel, sharing my videos. You all have been terrific in drumming up some conversations over social media, and I can't thank you enough. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next review.